and it's a pleasant hike. Anyway, I see these aspens, and you see here's one that's been bent over, leaning against a tree, and it's stripped of bark. And then there's another one right about here that's been bent over. And there's a third one, a larger one right here, leaned into a tree. But the interesting thing about this is it's actually been weaved in among branches. Now that's impossible for that to fall there. Someone had to shove that, or something had to shove that in there. And looking at the base, I'm going to go look at the base to see if that's actually been moved there, or if that was an original tree. And again, it's completely devoid of bark. And that's been messed with there. What does that mean? Does that mean anything? I can't really tell you. But there's where it's weaved in between the branches. There's no possible way that could have fallen there. And I'm looking now at the base of this, and this wiggles, and it was not there. This has been shoved in. In fact, it's stuck there because it's so wedged in to the branches up above. So, we'll see what else I find. And here's a large jumble of trees, basically somewhat like a little shelter. But the base end of them all here, one of them looks like it might have been partially cut. But there's only one or so root balls in the ground. All the rest of these look like they've been drug here. And there's the largest tree that's on the top that I have no idea where that came from. And then there's kind of a whole jumble of logs around here that there aren't any bases to them, and they're laying in a couple of different directions. Here's a tree here that appears, there's an angle to that that may have been cut, but there's several here that are broken off to about 10, 12, 20 feet in the air that just appear they've snapped. Now that would have to be high wind or lightning or somebody shaking the tree violently. There's a whole bunch of this stuff right in this little spot. There must be 20 or more big trees here, all laying up in this stack, and there's only a few bases. The others have all been drug here. And there's two more. There's a big one right there. There's no base for that one. This one has been partially sawed and then fell over, but again it has no base nearby here, so it was drug here and kind of interwoven into this mess. This is pretty interesting. I haven't seen anything like this yet in my searching. And then the other one is that this one here, the butt section is up in the air. The biggest, widest section is poking up. So that didn't fall that way. And this is within about 50 feet of that structure I just photographed. Here's a teepee of, it's like 4 larger trees and 2 smaller ones in a little teepee structure here leaning against this tree. Again, we have the ones that I can see don't have bases near there. And here's another mass. Now I've gone and shaked all those trees that are here in the ground, and they're all, none of them are rooted. They've all been moved there. And I don't know, there must be probably close to 10 that are leaning, but they've all had the bark stripped off of them, with the exception of this one. It's kind of a support. And I'm wondering if rather than a shelter, maybe it's the way they feed. on this stuff. Here's another one stripped off bark. There's another one. And just basically, and here's another one. They've all got the bark stripped off them. All these trees that are down. There are so many teepee type structures in this little area that I really can't count them. And all right here. I mean, I haven't walked 100 yards since I started photographing. And this stuff is just everywhere. Now you say, well, maybe lightning strikes, but all the bigger trees are still here. It's the smaller trees. You know, they're not small trees, but the smaller ones are the ones that are all down. Here's another batch of stuff that's piled up. And I'm in the middle here of just a maze of fallen logs and trees here. And again, I'm trying to find one that's on the ground that doesn't have the bark stripped off of it. And at least some of the bark. I mean 50% or more of the bark. And I don't see one. And that's not the case when you go. Now bears could be doing this, you know. They could be pulling this off and looking for bugs or whatever, eating the inside of the bark. But here's that teepee I showed from the other angle. It's much more impressive when I'm sitting here looking at it. You know, when I'm just walking around in the woods, I'll find one or maybe two trees leaning on the same tree, usually in the same direction, interspersed, but not very many tree leans. But I can honestly say I've never in my life seen this many tree leans in such a small area. And again, every one of these leaning trees has got the bark stripped off of it. And I don't think any of those are rooted. There's some smaller ones leaning against that big tree that everything's leaning against. And here's another jumble of at least 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, actually about 10 or more tree branches all, again, piled up here. This isn't natural. Again, I'm still within about 100 yards of where I started photographing this stuff. Alright, here's more. Further along the ridge. This is a little ridge that I'm kind of right on the peak of it, but it's not the highest ridge around here. But there's no water that I found yet nearby here. You can see all these trees leaning over in here. And here's something kind of interesting. Now that does not appear to be upside down, just broken off up there at the top. But I don't see signs of lightning strikes here. I don't see that. Don't see that. I'm tending to think what this is these logs are pushed over and then leaned up so that they can be accessed to be fed upon. That's what I think is going on. And they're in an area, and that's where they kind of lean them to. If you can see from the camera the way this is made, you've got the butt section of that tree stuck up in the air, and it is over the top of one of these pine boughs, pulling the bough down and holding it. And there's a couple of pine boughs that are still green, and a little pine tree right here. And then you follow this big long down, and it goes down to here. Follow it all the way up and down. And there it goes. And the butt end is up in the air. It didn't fall there. This This one here is been put there. This one here has been put there, support. They both basically all cross to right up there and act as the framework where the bows can be over the outside. And then there's a little sitting place right here. It hasn't been used in a little while. But it looks like it has been used. I mean, that stuff's matted in there. Looks like something's been in there in the last few months, and then here it looks like a stick that's just leaned up against there. I'm on the north facing side of the slope, just 100 feet from the top. And again, there's so many structures like this, but I don't know that I call them structures. I think what it is they're feeding, they drag them over, lean them up so they can access it, because in most of them there seems no real rhyme or reason to what they're doing other than leaning them up and then all the bark stripped away. And invariably the trees that have bark are the ones that are still standing, though some that are still standing have much of the bark stripped away. Now here's where something, bear or a Sasquatch, has sat down and torn apart a bunch of pine cones. Those are the leaves out of pine cones. I've done that. I've torn them apart before to get the nuts inside. So something was doing that right here. And there's a log down there, and you see the bark hanging from it. So it's been shredded. But something, bear or Sasquatch, has ripped that bark. And all of it, and here's another batch of trees that are a jumbled up mass. There's another teepee kind of structure here. I mean, again, they're just everywhere. And then here's just a couple of huge trees that started kind of a network of a whole bunch of trees. Now the biggest tree doesn't have the bark on that's laying on the top. That's the first one laying down that I have seen that doesn't have the bark stripped away. But all these other trees do. They're going a couple different directions. In fact, here's this long one here. You can see right over there. It's suspended in the air. And it's, you know, anyway, there it is right there. This is what the remainder of this forest looks like. Quakies spread out. Every once in a while, one leaning. A few on the ground. But nothing like what I've been looking at over there in those dense trees. And it appears that most of those trees were drugged there. And I would imagine like from an area this. I'm maybe 150 yards, 200 yards from where all those teepee kind of structures are. And I'm